Almost every movie has production problems. It's just that most times, the general public doesn't hear about them until well after the film's been released. Waterworld was the most expensive film ever made at the time, and as such was placed under a gigantic microscope. Anytime there was an issue with the production, it made front-page entertainment news. Before we get into that, let's go back to the beginning. In 1986, aspiring screenwriter Peter Rader wanted to get into filmmaking. At the advice of a friend who worked at New Horizons, the studio run by low-budget king Roger Corman, he told him to write a knockoff of Mad Max. Post-apocalyptic movies were very popular at the time, and incredibly cheap to make. Rader then proceeded to write Waterworld, where instead of the world being a giant desert because of nuclear war, the entire world was flooded because the polar ice caps melted. The movie would revolve around one character, Mariner, a mutant loner who had webbed feet and gills behind his ears so he could breathe underwater. When he presented it to Corman, he was laughed out of the office because a movie like this would cost between $3 to $5 million, which was way too expensive. Rader shopped the script around and attracted the attention of some larger studios. After a bidding war, it was picked up by the Gordon Company, and Rader was paid $350,000 up front, with another $150,000 if and when the film was actually made. Gordon joined with Universal for distribution, and they gave the movie a $30 million budget. During this time, the landscape of movies was changing. Movie studios were banking on large-budget blockbuster films that were a bigger risk, but also a bigger reward. Movie theaters were also changing as a result. There was a time when most movie theaters would only run 2 movies at a time. With more movies being made and the higher price tag, theaters changed to multiplexes, where they could run more films with bigger screens and more seats, which would attract a bigger audience. Gone were the days of releasing films in different parts of the country over many weeks. Now they'd open a film in as many theaters as possible to maximize the profit intake. Having the movie open in the #1 spot was imperative, because then they could market how much of a hit the movie was. Studios were dumping more and more money into movies, and using marketing tactics to make it sound appealing to a mainstream audience. Jumanji, the special effects extravaganza that cost $65 million. They were hoping that people would look at the budget of the film and assume that translated to quality. Due to the success of Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, they hired Kevin Reynolds to direct Waterworld in 1991. A large part of having a successful blockbuster was having a bankable lead. They looked into who the biggest stars were at the time, and Kevin Costner was one of them. Even though Reynolds was friends with Costner and just worked with him on Robin Hood, he asked the studio not to hire him. While filming Robin Hood, the two had numerous blowouts that damaged their friendship. The studio didn't care, and they offered the lead role of the Mariner to Costner, and he accepted. While this was going on, the script was going through some rewrites. Writer-director David Twohy was one of the people handling this. In his rewrite, he added in more elements from Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior. With these changes, the budget increased to $65 million. Waterworld started pre-production in June of 1994, with Costner getting a $14 million paycheck. Even though the budget was set at $65 million, it was now looking to go over $100 million. After Steven Spielberg made Jaws, he lamented his insistence on filming in the ocean due to all the production problems it caused. He said that in the future, he'd only film water scenes on a lake or on a set. He suggested that other filmmakers take his advice and learn from his mistake. As a way to keep up the appearance that this was going to be a huge film, the studio ignored the advice and planned to have the film shot off the coast of Hawaii. They had the gigantic atoll set built, which alone cost $5 million. During this time, they still didn't have a bad guy. They offered Samuel L. Jackson the role of Deacon, the villain of the film. He almost took it, but he turned it down for Die Hard with a Vengeance. They hired Dennis Hopper, who had just played a villain in the upcoming action film Speed. Right before filming, the studio brought in Joss Whedon to punch up the script. In a later interview, he said the script had major problems. For example, there was no water in the last 40 pages. It was all either on a boat or on the island. He was supposed to be there for a week, but ended up being there for 7, which he called 7 weeks in hell. He said Costner had rewritten much of the script, and it was deemed untouchable by the star, so in the end, most of Whedon's material wasn't used. Reporters got wind of the troubles on set and labeled the film Fishtar and Kevin's Gate, after Ishtar and Heaven's Gate, 2 notorious over-budgeted flops. This started to shape the public's perception of the film. No longer was it an action extravaganza, the most expensive movie ever made. Now, it was a horrendously over-budgeted production that most likely was going to be a monumental bomb. The atoll set proved to be a disaster because no one thought to build bathrooms. Whenever people needed a bathroom break, they had to ferry them to shore where they had a row of porta potties. This, of course, lengthened the shoot. The other problem with the set was that they were filming during hurricane season. They had to stop production 3 times due to hurricane alerts. and on one occasion, the entire thing sank. This cost nearly $500,000 to dredge it back up. Other things that drove up the price tag was the $1,800 a night suite Costner was staying in during filming. The model they used for the Exxon Valdez was 112 feet long. Costner rode an $800,000 yacht to and from set every day. The location they were filming in had frequent gusts of wind, which ruined many shots. Waterworld had an unusually large second unit because of the massive amount of stunts they had to do. With union fees, overtime, and numerous problems, the budget was headed towards $200 million. Many of the cast and crew were injured on the film. Numerous people were stung by jellyfish. Stuntmen nearly drowned, and Costner almost died at one point. It was a miserable shoot. The movie was supposed to be a 96-day shoot, but with all the problems, it ended up being 166 days before principal photography was done. Although now that filming was over, the problems didn't stop there. Reynolds created his director's cut, which Costner hated. Costner levied his star power with the studio, and was able to take control away from the director. Reynolds was furious and quit the film. He stated, "In the future, Costner should direct all his own movies. That way he can work with his favorite director and his favorite actor." The director's cut was 176 minutes, which was way too long for the studio. They needed the film to be shorter. That way it would play more times in a day and have a better chance of recouping their investment. Since they sunk so much money into the big action sequences, they weren't going to remove any of them. So when they got to working on a new edit of the film, the character development and the slow scenes were the first things to be cut. Costner delivered a shorter film, and it was sent out for test screenings. The audience hated the film, which continued the wave of bad press. They sent it back for edits until they had a 135-minute version ready for theaters. At this point, with all the budget and marketing, the film cost over $200 million. It released on July 28, 1995, and spent 2 weeks in the #1 spot. It seemed the negative press turned into curiosity, as moviegoers went out to see the most expensive movie ever made, and to see if it was really as bad as the critics said it was. While it only made $88 million in the US, it ended up making $264 million worldwide. That's not including home video sales, merchandise, cable deals, and so on. The movie was a disaster from the perspective of the people working on it, but it still ended up turning a profit. Years later, ABC premiered the film on TV. However, they somehow had the original director's cut. This was the full 176-minute version, only without the violence, swearing, and nudity. For those lucky enough to catch it, the film was much better than the theatrical version. When the film was released on DVD, it was still the theatrical version. But due to demand, they released the extended cut a few years later. This was again the director's cut, but sadly, it was the censored broadcast TV version. Despite that, this version of the film was still the superior version. It fills in almost all the plot holes the theatrical cut created. It explained more of Enola's backstory. It showed how the smokers made ammunition and refined oil for their boats. There was more time between the Mariner and Helen. They extended the scene towards the end, and Helen gives Mariner a name.
It's a name. It's from an old story about a great warrior returning from battle. His name was Ulysses.
They also showed that dry land was the peak of Mount Everest. This and many other things are covered in the 41 minutes of additional footage. The movie was released on Blu-ray in 2009. While the visuals look stunning, it's still the theatrical cut of the film. They could have done a full restoration, like the recently restored cut of Heaven's Gate, which after many decades finally proved that the director was right. They have the footage, and releasing the director's cut could potentially breathe new life into the film, as people could see the correct version. Most likely, it comes down to money. It would cost more to restore the director's cut, and they've already dumped too much money into the movie as it is. For all the problems with the movie, in the end, it turned out good. I'm not talking Oscar-winning performances, but a fun, entertaining post-apocalyptic movie. The theatrical version's okay, but the director's cut is far superior. I do hope that one day Universal does a full uncut restoration of the film, because scenes like this...
It does look like shit. And it feels like cold shit.
Just sounds silly.
It does look like slime. And it feels like cold slime.
It's hard to say if the media frenzy worked for or against the movie. Would it have done as well if people didn't know it was the most expensive movie ever made? A $200 million budgeted film was a big deal back then, but now it's fairly commonplace. Giant budgeted films aren't news anymore. It's kind of gone in reverse, where a movie with a big buzz and a tiny budget gets noticed. Waterworld may not be the most original film out there, but at least you can see where the budget went. The ocean shots are beautiful, and the atoll set is incredibly impressive. It's a shame it was overwhelmed by the on-set antics and out-of-control budget. Although a part of me wonders, what would a $5 million Roger Corman Waterworld have been like? I'll bet that would have been pretty fantastic.
If I let you out of here, you're taking us with you.
Sure.